at around 2 a.m. Apart from a few dim lights here and there, the place was pretty dark in my cramped 10 by 10 cell. I was lying flat on my back with my hands tucked behind my head, and I was staring at the shadows dancing around me. I should have been sleeping, but my mind was churning through memories I'd rather forget. Then I heard footsteps, so I started counting, 7, 8, 9, 10. There he was. His face was set in a hard, emotionless mask, just like all the others here. He was just doing his job, making his rounds without looking for any connection or conversation. I didn't know if he saw me lying there or not, but it didn't matter. He was on the outside and I was in here. As he moved past my cell, I stopped counting. There was no point in keeping track. He wouldn't be back for another hour and a half anyway. I turned my gaze to the ceiling, thinking about what I'd do once I got out. 5 days left, then I'd be done for good. I'd served 7 months of a one I was sentenced to 10 years, and my job was waiting for me, but everything else was different. My older brother Luke had kept my car running, managed my bills and kept a watch on my dwindling bank account. I was angry, but I learned to bury those feelings at least until I was out. It's obvious why guys are doing 10 or 20 years and walk out with hollow eyes. Humanity is one of the first things to go in here. This place was tainted. It was a different story in the high-security facility in upstate, but you still had to keep your head down to survive. I closed my eyes, hoping for a few hours of sleep. I wished for the darkness of my old bedroom, the one with blackout shades. "I'll be picked up next Tuesday," Luke had told me. We talked through a plexiglass wall, hopefully for the last time, about anything special I wanted to eat on my first night out. I smiled and said, "A big, medium-rare steak, please." He laughed and said, "Anthony, you're easy. You thought you'd give me a real challenge for sneaking past Beth." Luke said, "I'll be staying with him and his wife, Beth, until I get settled. My house barely had any food or furniture left, so this will give me time to regroup. It's not the Ritz, but it's clean, and you can come and go as you please." I didn't smile back. I started to say, "Thanks, Spud." He caught me off guard. "Forget it. We're family, that's what family does." Luke knew what it meant to me. "Don't worry about Mom and Dad," he continued, "they'll come around once things settle down," but we both knew that wouldn't happen anytime soon. "I've seen my kids. I asked 2 weekends ago at Mom and Dad's." He replied, "Nora looks about the same, but Jack's got one of those trendy bowl cuts. Awful. I told him so myself." Luke laughed, but the story wasn't as light. He was really supportive, you know. He said he wasn't my dad, so he didn't have to listen. I was so angry, but my mum was there. My son and daughter would stay with Sarah once I got out, but I wasn't in a rush to make things happen. The divorce was finalized, but I still own half the house and she owed me close to $65,000. She probably got rid of the safety deposit box, taking the CDs and bonds, but I had a list with my lawyer to deal with that Kathy and that ex. My friend Tom had really messed me around, but I wasn't going to let it happen again. I took a moment to reflect on the past, preparing myself for whatever the future might hold. As soon as I got out of this place, I'd start building a new life. This nightmare would be in the past, and I'd move on, no matter how long it took. Before all this happened, I thought life was good. A few weeks before everything went south, a couple of friends had hinted at things, but I brushed them off. They probably thought I knew or was okay with it. It hit me now that no one wanted to get involved. We had 12 years together, 2 kids, a decent house and steady jobs. Sure, we had our spats, but I loved Sarah and never imagined she'd betray me. We weren't the social butterflies of the neighborhood, just had a few couples we hung out with, most married for over 7 years like us, all with kids. Tom and his wife Brenda didn't have kids, though they'd been trying for ages. Sarah probably knew the details, but I kept them to myself. Brenda's drinking started about a year ago. She was quiet and reserved at first, but things quickly got out of hand. Tom, who rarely drank, ended up taking care of her. He'd have to carry her home after a night of drinking. It was sad, but it wasn't my problem. That was a mess with Brenda. I mentioned it to Sarah once as we were getting ready for bed. She didn't respond. I think she passed out a couple of times. Greg and Jenna probably left early because she was hitting on Greg, asking him to help her out of her clothes. Sarah just shook her head. She's a wreck over not having kids, but blaming Tom isn't going to solve anything. I told her they could adopt, but she refuses to hear it. She's convinced it's Tom's fault. They'll either fix it or call it quits. I said I was dreading the next dinner out with them. I'll try talking to her this week, Sarah said. A touch of hope, maybe she'll calm down for at least one night, but Brenda didn't calm down. Waiter, how's a girl supposed to get a drink around here? She yelled, slurring her words. She was already starting in on Tom, and he was at his breaking point, so I stepped in. Come on, Brenda. You promised me a dance, I said, leading her to the dance floor. She tried to protest, but I didn't give her a choice. I danced with her through 3 songs while Sarah stayed back to talk to Tom, who looked Brenda was pretty tired, so she said she needed to use the restroom and wandered off after a few minutes. I wasn't sure what to do, so I asked 2 women going in to check on her. One of them asked if she was wearing a bright yellow dress. I nodded, and she shook her head. She said that she'd stand guard while I got her. I went in and propped Brenda up by the sink and splashed cold water on her face. She came to for a moment, but then she slumped again, practically carrying her. I made my way back to the table where Tom looked both humiliated and furious. Tom, let me help you get her to the car, I offered. She's out cold and won't wake up anytime soon. As I held up a very drunk Brenda, Tom looked at me, embarrassed. Anthony, I've got it. It's not the first time, but it'll be the last, he muttered, despite his protests. I carried her to the car while he grabbed her purse and mumbled a brief goodbye. I laid Brenda. I patted Tom on the shoulder and said, I'm sorry, man. There wasn't much else to say. Thanks for helping. I'm at the end of my rope. I don't know what to do. You two need some help. Maybe Sarah and I can help. If you need us, just let us know. I knew his answer was just polite agreement. I doubted they'd last another couple of months. As it turned out, I wasn't far off, but no one could have predicted the outcome. 3 weeks later, just past 10, just to give you a heads up, it's 30 p. morning. On Thursday, we heard sirens and saw bright lights at the end of our block. Sarah and I were both up and she started to come outside, but I stopped her, telling her to stay inside. I'll check it out, I said, joining the crowd. I saw the fire department's rescue crew prying open the driver's side door of Tom's car. I asked the neighbor if Tom was all right. She said he wasn't. It was actually Brenda. They'd been arguing and she grabbed his keys, ran out, and drove off. She didn't make it far before she rear-ended a parked car at about 40 miles per hour. The ambulance arrived and the paramedics put Brenda on a stretcher, then drove off with Tom. I noticed that the front door of their house was wide open, the lights were still on, and the furniture was scattered. I called Sarah to give her the update, and then went over and locked up for Tom, leaving a note that I had his keys. When I got home, Sarah told me that she wasn't feeling well. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt, and she swerved before hitting the car, and the airbag deployed, but she hit her head against the window hard enough to shatter it. She was doing around 35 miles per hour. Tom's with her at the hospital. We'll wait to visit tomorrow. He's dealing with enough tonight. We went to bed, but barely slept, worrying about it. It's 12 a.m. The next day, I got a call from Sarah. She was really worried. Anthony and Brenda were on life support, Tom was a wreck, and someone needed to be there. I'm leaving work. Meet me at the hospital on my way there. I grabbed some food for us and called Sarah's parents to ask if they could pick up our kids after school in the hospital waiting room. Sarah and others were gathered around Tom, trying to console him. How is she? I whispered. Sarah shook her head grimly. Not good, she replied. The doctor told Tom there's minimal brain activity and he's been quiet since. I sat next to Tom. Are you doing okay? I asked. Not going to wake up, Anthony said. The doctor asked if I'd consider taking her off life support, but how can I do that? She's my wife, not a machine to turn off. He was shouting now, grief, and he was really frustrated. He kept asking why they couldn't fix her. Surely that's what doctors are for? Just then, Brenda's parents arrived and went into her room with Tom. There was a lot of crying, accusations, and anger. Her father blamed Tom for her condition. He couldn't see beyond his heartbreak. About 20 minutes later, the doctor came out with Brenda's parents, who were devastated. They said they'd never be able to speak to their daughter again. We left the hospital. That evening, I picked up the kids and went home. I was really shaken up. I kept thinking, I hope I never have to make that decision for Sarah or anyone I love. 2 days later, surrounded by Tom, Brenda's parents, and the doctor, they turned off the life support machine and Brenda passed away quietly. We stayed to comfort Tom as best we could. Whatever her flaws, Brenda had been loved, and now she was gone. At her funeral, people only spoke of the good memories. Tom took it hard. He retreated from everything. He took a month off to go back east. I assured him I'd keep an eye on things. While he was away, one night while we were getting ready for bed, I gave Sarah a hug and said, "You know I love you." The past few weeks had been tough on us both, and the tragedy was still fresh in our minds. If I ever ended up like Brenda, just let me go. I wouldn't want to be kept alive by machines. Don't talk like that, she said, shaking her head. That could never happen to us. A few weeks later, Tom returned. Sarah helped him go through Brenda's belongings. After 3 months, he seemed to be on the mend. We invited him to social gatherings and even helped set him up on a few dates. Nothing really took off. Life started moving on again, or so we thought. 6 months later, Tom finally seemed like himself, laughing and socializing with us. It was good to see him finding joy again and a small piece of peace after such a painful time. Looking back, maybe I missed some signs. Sarah and I were still close, and things between us hadn't changed in some ways, but there was something different after a few months. I finally asked if something was bothering her. "Nothing really, Anthony, why do you ask?" She replied a bit too casually, "You just seem a little distant lately." "Everything's fine," she said with a smile. "Maybe you just haven't been getting enough attention. If you want more, just ask." She laughed and used a word I'd never heard from her before, lovemaking. I shook off the odd feeling. I kissed her and tried to push it out of my mind, but I'll never forget Friday. On the 20th of August, my world suddenly came undone. Sarah called me at work to say that the kids would be with her parents for the weekend and asked when I'd be home. I told her I'd make sure I'm back early, and she didn't ask for anything specific, just to let her know when I'd arrive. It was 3. It was about an hour and a half until I could leave, but my mind was racing at the thought of a quiet weekend together. I drove home carefully, keeping an eye on the speed limit, but still made it in a record 28 minutes. I should have noticed something was off when I saw 2 cars in the driveway, one of them Tom's. "Hey honey, I'm home," I called out. Tom and Sarah were in the kitchen, and something in the air felt heavy. "Hey Tom," I said slowly. "What's going on?" "Anthony, I need to talk to you." "Please have a seat," Sarah said. Her voice was unsteady. "I'd rather stand." "Anthony, I wanted you to hear it from me before you get the papers confused." "What papers?" "Sarah, divorce papers," I said. "What are you talking about?" "Divorce papers?" I shot a glare at Tom. "You should leave, Tom. This is between me and my wife." Then I had a realization as I looked at her, and then back at him. "Tom, get out now." "Anthony, this involves him too," she insisted. I clenched my fists, anger flaring. "Tom, if you don't leave now, you'll leave in a body bag," I warned. He shot me a nervous glance before heading out. "Sarah, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about, Anthony. I'm in love with Tom." "I'm sorry. How long has this been going on, even before Brenda passed?" "You don't know anything." "Oh, I know enough. While I was consoling you, you were with my wife," Sarah said. "No, I'm not going to do that anymore." "Get out," I shouted. "Get out." She looked at me and finally said, "Fine, I'll come back for my things when you've calmed down. You'll be dead by then." I left the house for 4 hours, then locked up, had a few more beers and drank until I couldn't think. The next morning, her things were gone. I was still angry and didn't reach out to anyone, though I was sure the neighbors knew by then. I called Sarah's mom to ask about the kids, but she was cold. Sarah already picked them up last night. Frank, don't play games. She was here picking up her. Things are now as follows. I would like to speak to my children. She terminated the call and, when I called back, did not answer. I was extremely angry, so I canceled all the credit cards we shared and withdrew as much cash as I could from the bank. I made myself some coffee, ate, and thought through my plan for the day: to change the garage code, install new locks, and move anything valuable over to Luke's place. Just as I was about to leave, the doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw a man holding a large envelope. He waited a few minutes, then left. I called Luke and his wife Beth to tell them what had happened and asked them to keep it quiet. Then I went to Home Depot to get new locks. On my way back, I saw Tom's car in my driveway with Sarah loading things into it. I got a bit angry and started flirting with her and shouting. I reversed my car into the driveway and rammed into the back of his car. He scrambled inside just as I hit his car, pushing it against the closed garage door. I reversed up about 15 feet and ran it again, smashing his car through the door. Steam rose from under my hood and my engine groaned, but I managed to back up again, this time with only a few feet between us before my car stalled. I was still breathing hard when I grabbed an aluminium bat from the garage and started swinging, shattering the windows and windshield. I was about to open Tom's door when I heard loud voices shouting behind me. "Put your hands on your head," they said. I did as I was told, dropping the bat and kneeling down. They cuffed me and placed me in the patrol car. Tom got out of his car and I saw Sarah's tear-streaked face as I spoke to the police. I managed to smile, although it was a bit forced. They took me away to the station. They booked me and I made one call to Luke. It was the weekend, so I spent 2 nights in jail before my court appearance on Monday. I pleaded not guilty and the judge set my bail, which Luke paid late that afternoon. Anthony said they're talking about attempted homicide or at least assault with a deadly weapon. I know I said first thing, but take me to the bank. Sarah's probably drained the accounts, but I need to check. Sure enough, the cash was gone, but the CDs and bonds remained untouched. However, a court order blocked me from accessing them. I called Sarah, who actually answered. "You could have left me $5 at least. You really are cheap." I said I needed that money for the kids. She replied coldly, "Tom makes enough. I've got mortgage payments to think about too. Maybe I should just warm the house up with a little fire." I replied sarcastically, "Anthony, stop with the crazy talk. I'm sorry it turned out like this, but you're not helping yourself." "I'll accept it when you send my kids back home," I retorted. "I can't, especially. After all this is over, I'll let you see them, but you won't be seeing me and Tom." She ended the call, saying, "From now on, talk to my attorney, Sarah. You have no idea how sorry you're going to be." I muttered this to the dial tone at my next court date. My attorney argued for temporary insanity, saying I'd acted impulsively after Sarah's shocking revelation. Sarah and Tom, they both asked for a restraining order. The judge asked me about what I'd said to Tom. I told him I'd warned him, but maybe not in those exact words. "How would you feel if a friend betrayed you like that?" I tried to explain, but my lawyer gave me a look that said it all. "Anthony, don't say a word," he whispered. "We're trying to prove you didn't know what you were doing." Mike, my boss, was my main character witness. He said I was a reliable employee who never lost my temper. After his testimony, the case closed and we waited for the judge's decision. Back at work, Mike joked about hiring someone to make Tom and Sarah disappear. I said no, but I still thought about it. I was still caught in the system. 6 months and $12,000 later, my divorce was finalized. After spending $12,000, my divorce was finally finalized. Sarah got half of everything, including the proceeds from the house sale. She claimed her jeweler was missing, accusing me of taking it. I countered that my things were gone too, suggesting she'd taken it all. I was the one in jail. I yelled at my attorney after hearing the judge's sentence. Anthony, it could have been worse. You could have been looking at manslaughter charges. He replied calmly, saying that with good behavior, I'd be out in less than 8 months, and my record could be cleared in 2 years. He basically told me to just do the time and get out. It was easy for him to say, but I wasn't looking forward to spending 24 hours a day in jail. I appealed, but it didn't work. My life had crumbled within a year, all thanks to Sarah and Tom. Your job will be here when you get out, Mike advised before I turned myself in. I just wanted to say, don't do anything stupid and keep your head down. After my last visit with my kids, I reported to the county facility. Luke kept my inmate account topped up, but there was a lot of junk without a phone or computer. I wrote my thoughts on paper and made bi-weekly collections. I made sure to stay in touch with Luke, my mom, and the kids by making weekly collect calls. Luke said he'd arranged for someone to repair my car and take care of the lawn. He'd also installed new deadbolt bolts on the house. Sarah picked up the rest of her and the kids' clothes, but the furniture stayed. I made sure she had a court order to remove anything else. I was grateful that Luke was looking out for me. Sarah had let my parents see the kids every other Sunday, but not without making some snide remarks about their jailbird father. She planned to set strict rules for when I got out, but my parents put up with her to keep communication open. After 7 days, I confirmed my visitation rights every other weekend, a full month in the summer, and shared holidays. I informed my boss that I'd need a week to settle back in after my release. I got out earlier than expected and was really happy to swap the orange jumpsuit for normal clothes. Luke was waiting outside and we went straight to the nearest bar. I said, clinking bottles with him, before drinking the first of 3 beers. Beth's got a steak dinner with all the trimmings ready for us. He said, you're staying with us for a few nights until you sort things at the house. It's still up for sale, but there haven't been any offers yet. Sarah wants to lower the price, but she needs your approval first. I smiled, feeling a bit more in control. All the furniture's still there, but I did get rid of the master bedroom set like you asked. He added, dinner was fantastic. I ate more in that one meal than I had in months, savoring the freedom to indulge. I drank too much, vaguely recalling 5 or 6 beers and 3 glasses of wine. When I finally woke up, it was after 10. It's 12 a.m. By 11 the next morning, I was able to make it to the bathroom and get myself presentable in the kitchen. I found a note from Luke. If you're reading this, you survived last night. There's coffee ready, and everything else is in the fridge. The spare bathroom has soap, razor blades, a toothbrush, and toothpaste. If you need anything else, we'll get it tonight. The keys to your car and house are on the key rack by the back door. Don't do anything stupid. See you around 5:30. Luke knew that 2 cups of coffee and an English muffin were all I could manage after a shower and shave. I almost felt human again. Luke had laid out a fresh set of clothes and within an hour I was on my way to my house. I paused for a good 10 minutes letting memories wash over me, taking a breath. I noticed the new deadbolt with I turned the key in the lock and stepped inside. The place was a mess. Clothes were strewn everywhere. The kitchen was a mess, and the fridge still held old food in the corner by the sink. I saw the dented wall from that night when my fist met a stud. Rubbing my knuckles, I recalled that moment upstairs. The kids' closets were bare save for a few forgotten trinkets. My bedroom felt empty, and all that was left was my dresser and a pile of clothes. The dark patches on the carpet showed where her bed and dresser had been. It was clear that the room needed a complete overhaul before I'd feel comfortable using it again. The whole house needed work before it could be sold, but I wasn't in a rush to sell. I made a list of repairs, deciding that I wanted it done right, though not necessarily by me. I checked with the bank and she'd emptied the lockbox. They had video evidence and my attorney filed a motion to get the contents back. The court said Sarah had to return everything she'd taken. She's offering to trade her share of the house for your share of the CDs and bonds. My attorney explained that I told her to return everything or she'd face arrest for noncompliance. She can be as upset as she wants, but my job is to protect your interests. That's why I'm here. Back at the house, I took inventory of what I had left and called a local contractor to repair the walls. I also reached out to Mary Mains to clean up the kitchen and dining room, where I'd thrown the microwave and dishes. The utility is still on, so I could move back in once I got a new bed. After a bit of shopping, I found a decent queen-size set for $900. At least I wouldn't be sleeping on a mattress my ex had shared with someone else. Hank the contractor arrived on Saturday morning for an estimate. "Your walls are solid," he said, glancing at the dent. "You hurt your hand when you punched that stud. Just fix the holes and put on a fresh coat of paint." I replied, "Nothing fancy." "How about $200? That's my price. Take it or leave it. You did the neighborhood a favor with that thing with Tom." He added with a grin, "Most of the guys around here look up to you now." I thanked him and he got to work. He finished within 6 weeks. My CDs and bonds were back in the bank, the house was repaired and cleaned, and things felt almost normal when the kids stayed with me for their first weekend. It was awkward, so I broke the ice by saying, "I know this feels strange, but this is still your home." I told them whatever they needed to say, and they replied, "Dad, we love you." Jack said he was sorry about what his mom did, and Nora nodded. We didn't know about Tom until she said we'd be moving to his house. We weren't happy about it, and we still aren't. I told them there wasn't much I could do, even without Tom. Your mom and I wouldn't be getting back together. What we had is over. I'm still your dad, and I'll always love you. You know I'll always be here for you. We ordered pizza and watched a movie. I wanted to talk about their mother, but I held back. That first weekend felt like a win. We ended up feeling like a family again, just different. I took Jack to get a proper haircut. Life moved on slowly after that. I went back to work, kept up a modest social life and focused on my work. Jack took up soccer and Nora was all about dance classes, which kept me busy. Everyone except my brother kept telling me to let go and start fresh. They'd say, "You're still young. You can find someone new, get married and build a new life." I'd just shake my head and forget it. I wasted 14 years on her. If I want to stay mad, that's my business. Ultimately, it was my decision. I'd respond that none of them had gone through what I had in the past 2 years. Sometimes, you need to take a firm stance to make the pain go away, one way or another. That's what I was going to do. Sarah wanted to lower the price of the house, but I wasn't willing to budge. Anthony said it wouldn't sell in this market unless we dropped the price by at least $20. She said that if you're willing to give up $20, I said that if she gave up $20,000 of her share, then fine, but otherwise the price stays the same. She ended up spending hers on a new car and a vacation with Tom, while I banked mine to build a nest egg. 8.5 months after getting out, I heard about Tom's house fire while he and Sarah were at Jack's soccer game. Someone had drenched the electrical box in the back of the house in gasoline. The entire rear section was ruined and they lost power the next day. 2 officers showed up at my door, wanting to question me. I kept my answers simple. I was at a neighborhood party with at least 10 people who saw me there. I said, "Anthony, you were only a block away. You could have done this." One officer accused me of lying and demanded proof. I replied calmly, "I'm happy to tell you everything, but I want to know why you're charging me." Finally, I stood up and told them to charge me. They released me but warned they'd be watching my mental state. I checked off my list, 1 down, 2 to go. Since Sarah and Tom's house was unlivable, I offered to take the kids while repairs were underway, which could take a couple of months. Sarah wasn't pleased but didn't argue. "Anthony, I know you did it regardless of what the police say." She accused me one night as I picked up the kids. "I don't know what you're talking about." I replied, "I was with our friends too. It's a shame you and Tom aren't invited anymore. Maybe I could put in a good word for you." "Don't bother. We wouldn't go even if they begged us." She shot back, looking bitter, "Well, you have each other, and that's all that matters for now. I just thought you were both lucky to have each other." The kids seemed to want to spend more time with me, which didn't sit well with Sarah or Tom. I'd heard from the kids that they'd had some heated arguments with Tom, telling him he wasn't their father. Sarah blamed me, accusing me of stirring up trouble. I said, Sarah, I don't badmouth you. You're their mother, and I've told them to listen to you. As for Tom, he's a backstabber, lucky to still be walking around, but anyway, he's not that bad. She shot me a look that could kill. He's good to your kids, so stop putting him down. She insisted. I'm not going to happen. He's nothing to me, and I'd gladly dance on his grave. One day, I replied with an icy smile. She looked furious. Anthony, I'm going to need you to be more specific. What are you going to do, Sarah? Cheat on me, divorce me, put me in jail, and make my life hell? Oh, wait, you already did all that. You can't hurt me anymore, so go back to your husband and leave me alone. No more words. She walked away. It's hard to believe I used to love her work. It was going well within weeks and I was back to full speed. Mike had me take over 4 more accounts with the kids and no one else at home. I had the time after connecting with my new clients. I planned 2-day trips to each site to get familiar with their operations. 3 accounts were smooth, but K&G Enterprises was a challenge. They were overhauling their manufacturing process, so I needed monthly visits to keep up. The assigned engineer was knowledgeable but arrogant and uncooperative. It was tricky to get the data we needed. Mike, if they don't get me what I need, their whole system is going to get screwed up. I told Mike to bring in an intermediary who worked directly with me from then on. Her name was Amber Stevenson. She introduced herself, shaking my hand with a firm grip. I had a degree in process engineering and had been with K&G Enterprises for 5 years. We worked well together, and she always got me what I needed. 2 weeks before we wrapped up the first phase, I suggested dinner. I'd like to take you and your husband out as a thank you. The Westin, where I'm staying, has a great restaurant. How about 6? She agreed and we shook on it. I left the plant by 4. I caught up on emails and got to the restaurant early. When Amber arrived alone, I was surprised. Where's your husband? I asked. I'm not married. She laughed. Why do you ask? Oh, sorry. I just assumed. I glanced at the rings on her finger. I wear these to keep things professional. People don't hit on a married woman, and I avoid any uncomfortable issues. Married people get promoted faster. Their scene is more stable. How do you explain it at company events? I just say he's out of town. By the end of dinner, I told her a bit about the past 2 years. That's rough, she said, shaking her head. What you went through was brutal. Tell me about it, but I'm moving on. I was still thinking about revenge, but I wanted to rebuild my life. You're young, Anthony, and there are plenty of, she said, smiling, that there are women who'd be happy to be with a guy like me. I haven't had much ambition to date, though. It's still hard to trust anyone. You did ask me out, she said, teasing me. You and your husband. I corrected her. If I wasn't married, would you still have asked? I asked her, and her eyes twinkled. Probably, she said. You're easy to talk to, not like my ex. Thanks, I replied. I think she laughed. Dinner went great, and I left town the next day, not expecting to be back for a month. I asked Amber to call me if anything came up, and we kept in touch by phone and email. Before long, we were seeing each other most nights when I was in town, which was every couple of weeks. Trust was still an issue, but I was trying to get past it. After a couple of months, our relationship moved to the next level. I was finally ready to let someone in again. Maybe I'm starting. I thought that to feel normal, I'd better find out what was going on. One night, Amber said she had a conflict on Wednesday, and I didn't think much of it. I was in town, so I looked up a new restaurant to try out. After several visits, I'd been to most local places and found a nice Korean restaurant about 25 minutes away. I ordered a beer and a sampler platter, ready to relax. Then I heard her laugh. There was Amber sitting with another man. They were holding hands, and it was clear this was no casual dinner. My appetite vanished. I finished my beer, paid, and left on Thursday. I dodged her and ate lunch alone by 3 p.m. Amber was back, following me around and acting flirty. So you took care of your conflict last night? I asked. Yep, and tonight I'm all yours. And she said, smiling, I'm yours tonight. I looked her in the eye and found a cozy little Korean place with a sampler platter. This place sounds familiar, I said. Her face went pale. Anthony, I said, I can explain. No need. I already got rid of one lying woman. I don't need another. I walked away. I decided to cut my losses and end the relationship. After ignoring her emails for a week, she stopped trying. Fortunately, Mike reassigned me to a new contact, a guy. My trust issues were back in full force, and Amber only made it worse. Then, 3 months later, I got an unexpected early Christmas present. Tom was hit by a car while crossing the street. The witnesses only saw a black four-door car. I was at home when I saw 2 police officers arrive. My neighbor, Brad, was there too. One of the officers said, Mr. McFay, we'd like a word. I replied, Sure, no problem. I glanced at Brad and said, I'll catch up with you later. Then I turned back to the officers. I asked, Do you own a black Toyota Camry? The other officer asked. Yes, why? I replied, joking. Why did I get a parking ticket? They didn't laugh. Is the car here? The first officer asked. Yeah, it's in the garage. What's this about? They asked to see it, so I opened the garage. One officer took out a camera and started photographing the front right bumper. Can you explain these scratches and marks? He asked. No idea. It's a year-old car, so some nicks and scratches are normal. When they didn't respond, I added, So what's this about? Why are you interested in my car? Mr. McFay, there was a hit and run yesterday. Witnesses described a black sedan with dark windows like yours, like mine, and about 1 million other cars in town. I replied, feeling irritated. Did the license plate match, or did anyone actually see me driving? The officer paused. The witnesses only saw the car. As you can see, there's no real damage to the front. I said, gesturing at my car, I can account for my whereabouts from 8. I'm not sure what time it is. I was at work from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. Yesterday. Why are you picking on me? Your history with the victim and past threats let us hear one officer reply. Thanks for your cooperation. They started walking back to their patrol car. Wait, I called after them. Who is hit, Mr. Kelly? The officer replied, not turning back. Is he dead? I asked, unable to hide my smile. No, but he's in critical condition, the officer said, looking over his shoulder as they drove off. I went inside, opened a bottle of wine and ordered a pizza. I ate most of the pizza and downed the entire bottle of wine. It was a well-deserved celebration. The neighborhood was buzzing with gossip about Tom. Some felt sorry for him, while others said he got what he deserved. Personally, I was in 7th heaven. 2 days later, things took a turn and Tom died. I showed up at his funeral sharp as a tack, in a new suit with a fresh haircut and polished shoes. I even had my car washed and waxed for the occasion. The funeral home wasn't packed, but a lot of people lingered outside as I entered. The conversations were hushed, and I didn't bother signing the guest book. I just walked straight down the aisle. Sarah looked horrified, but my kids gave me small smiles. She tried to stop me from reaching the casket, but I'd been preparing for this moment when I got there. I leaned over and spat in Tom's face. I spat in Tom's face, enough to dribble onto his shirt. Sarah screamed, calling me every name under the sun. I didn't hide my smirk. 2 down, 1 to go. I whispered to her. She froze, terror mingling with her tears. I warned you, I said softly, and walked out of the silent funeral home. Over the next month, the police questioned me twice more at Sarah's insistence. She insisted that just because it wasn't my car didn't mean I wasn't involved. The driver was never caught. After a few months, it was old news. When the patrol car pulled up to my driveway, I was expecting it. I locked up my house and watched as they approached. Mr. MCY, do you know Richard Collins? A detective asked, showing me a picture. Sure, I replied, pushing the photo back. I hired him to keep an eye on my ex-wife. He's been on and off the job for about a month. Why did you hire Mr. Collins to watch your ex-wife? The detective asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Since she took up with her now late husband, bad luck seems to follow her. My kids live with her, so I hired Collins to keep them safe, especially at night. My wife said she'd been followed. The detective was pretty annoyed. She noticed Mr. Collins a few times and called us when we picked him up. He said, "You hired him, Mr. McVeigh. This is harassment. If it carries on, you could be facing charges. I'm just looking out for my kids. I don't care what happens to her, but my kids are different. If that's a problem, I'll count on your department to keep them safe." "It's not illegal," the detective said, though he looked annoyed. "It's close. Why not talk to your ex? My wife and I tried to work something out last time. I ended up in jail. They let me go, but they warned me they'd be watching. I didn't mind. I hadn't hired Collins to be discreet. I wanted Sarah to know she was being watched. The next guy I hired was even less subtle. He was a biker straight out of a Hell's Angels movie. He cost $30 an hour and worked 3 hours every fourth night. I knew he'd get the message across if she cracked. I'd have a chance to get the kids full-time is everything. I want to have my family back." "What do you want, Anthony?" Sarah screamed into the phone one night. Her voice was shaking. "I want you to choke on your own spit and die," I replied calmly. She hung up stunned. I was on my porch when the police arrived. "You're late," I said, waving them in. Sarah was charging me with threatening her life, but I'd already briefed my lawyer, who was waiting at the station. My client, he said it was a wish, not a threat. He told the officers they tried arguing that she felt threatened because she was being followed, but my lawyer held his ground. He said it's not illegal to have someone watch. He pointed out that unless you have a recording of Mr. McVeigh making a threat, you have no case. "Mr. McVeigh, why don't you move on? She left you. It happens. Someone's going to have to take the blame." Another officer warned, "I'll hold you responsible." I turned to my lawyer and said, "Is there a way to end this? My client wants his kids back." My lawyer said, "If Mrs. Kelly gives up custody, he'll back off. That's for the court to decide." The officer replied, "I'll think about it." He finally released me that Sunday morning. While reading the paper over coffee, the doorbell rang. It was Sarah's parents, dressed for church. I offered to get them some coffee, but they declined. "Anthony, we know what our daughter did wasn't right, especially with you going to jail. She's our only child, and we don't want anything to happen to her. I'm not looking to hurt her. Something happened to her." They looked at each other, unsure. "We spoke to her, but you know how stubborn she can be," her mother replied, trying to soften the tension. "That's where you're wrong. The woman I married would never have cheated or thrown me under the bus. I don't know who she is now, other than my kid's mother. I want her to suffer a miserable end. I don't forgive and I don't forget," I replied. They left quickly, and I was sure they got the message. Thursday evening around 7 p.m. morning. She finally showed up. I hadn't heard a car, so I assumed she'd walked over. I looked through the peephole and opened the door. "Come in, Sarah. Want a drink?" "Hemlock on the rocks," she joked, shutting the door. "Very funny. You really are a jerk," she shot back. "Outside, I think we're done here. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you have a short, miserable life." "I said I'm not leaving until we talk," she insisted, settling into the living room. "Do whatever you want. I've been paying since the divorce." I reminded her that I want it sold. "What will it take to drop the price?" she asked, sounding exasperated. I replied coolly that I just want you out of this neighborhood and out of my life. She retorted, "That's never going to happen." I said firmly. "Do you hate me that much?" she asked, her tone softer than I'd ever imagined. I replied, "It wasn't meant to go down this way." She started to become clearly uncomfortable. "I never planned to get involved with Tom, it just happened." "Things don't just happen, Sarah. You went into it willingly." Back then, she needed him, she said defensively. I fell in love with him because we needed each other. What were you doing, charity work? I needed you. Our kids needed you. Our marriage needed you. You chose him over us. Now he's dead, and suddenly he's not so needy anymore. I smiled at the memory. I only wish I'd been the one driving the car. You've become so hateful, Anthony. Taking pleasure in someone's misfortune is twisted, she said, disgusted. I may be twisted, but you and Tom pushed me there. 60% of marriages fail, but not all spouses end up hating each other. I pointed out. Don't you care about anyone else's marriage? She asked, her eyes narrowing. I don't know, I replied. How long have I been a fool? 5 months, she said, hesitating before answering. How many times? I asked. Did you sleep with him in our bed? Never, she said angrily. I wouldn't do that, so it was fine anywhere else. Our friends saw it and didn't tell me. I can't trust anyone now. Where do we go from here? This house is our last connection. What about the kids? I'm not giving them away. Up, she replied to Eli Lilly. You're the reason I lost custody. If I hadn't gone after Tom's car, things might have been different. Now it's just you and me. Her eyes widened in shock. Are you threatening me? I'd never deprive my kids of their mother. I mocked. Never, but if something should happen, I'd make sure. She said. They always remember you. She stood up, visibly shaken. I'm out of here. We had 12 good years, and I'm sorry it ended like this. She moved to kiss my cheek, but I pushed her away. Don't touch me. You disgust me, she stammered. I'm sorry. Don't be, I replied, watching her walk away. She reached the driveway, and I called out. You know, Tom had the same look right before he died. Too bad I didn't snap a picture. Everyone was out before he slipped away. As for how he died, that was just dumb luck on his part. Still, Sarah and her family would always suspect I was involved, and that was fine with me. Now, Sarah was likely at home locking her doors, thinking she was next, but I wasn't planning to touch her. I planted hints and let her paranoia grow. Maybe someday the kids would choose to live with me. The only truly good thing to come out of all this mess was meeting someone new. Her name is Amanda, and she works for the State Department of Corrections. She was responsible for checking in on me after I was released, making sure I was adjusting. Amanda's tough and takes no nonsense, which I respect. When the formalities were over, we started talking and found we actually had a lot in common. Once my probation was up, we went out on an actual date. I told her I had trust issues, and she admitted the same. We discovered that most people lie to her on one occasion or another. We're both working on our trust issues together, getting to know each other. Amanda showed me how my bitterness was holding me back from real life and meaningful relationships. If you mess up and end up back in jail, I'll make sure it's my fault. Cell block, that's where you end up, she said with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. I believe her. She's someone I'd never cross, and it's comforting knowing she'd never cross me either. For the first time in years, I think I'm ready to move on and open myself up to something real.